dreamed of better things to come and turned our faces towards the sun. We follow the light that we see in the dark and keep on going till we catch a spark. I believe there's a change to come. We'll never know if we never run. No sign is surfacing now again on the winding road. Don't turn around, we're going one way. Follow me now. The time is right, we're going home. I know you're in my mind always. Forever young and forever There's a distance to go from here. Was never the weight of the world we feared. I'll be with you and right beside, ever on and through the night. I know the signs are surfacing now again on the winding Don't turn around, we're going one way. The time is right, we're going home. I know you're in my mind always. Forever young and forever on.
And welcome to our 2020 Legislative Forum. We're glad you joined us today, and we have a very special guest. You're in for a real treat, sharing his bipartisan perspective on national politics and advocacy. Great timely information today. Before I introduce him, I would like to offer a word of thanks to all of our members who take the time and energy to support legislative and regulatory advocacy across our industry. And on behalf of property owners, buyers, and sellers alike, those that we serve. Whether you're attending our Day on the Hill, responding to a call for action, serving in a leadership role, or investing in RPAC, maybe you're simply voting. You make a positive difference, and we want to thank you for that. Now on to our speaker. Mark McKinnon is a political advisor, reform advocate, media columnist, and television producer. He was the chief media advisor to 5 successful presidential primary and general election campaigns. He has advised President George W. Bush and Senator John McCain, among others. Mark is the co-founder of No Labels, an organization dedicated to bipartisan civil dialogue and political problem solving. He's been a regular columnist for the Daily Beast and the Daily Telegraph, and a consultant to TV series including The Newsroom and House of Cards. Please join me in welcoming Mark McKinnon. Thanks, Mark.
Done a bunch of work with you all in the past in Texas and Colorado and the national organization, and I got to do one great event with you guys in Puerto Rico, I think a couple of years ago, where I ran into the First Lady, Miss Laura Bush, who I think was speaking to the same event. Anyway, great to be with you. It's super fun for me to be with the Tennessee organization because 100 years ago, I had a very fun chapter in Nashville. I ran away from home in the middle of high school I was an aspiring songwriter at the time, and I connected with Chris Christopherson, who some of you may recall was a well-known songwriter, great hits like Me and Bobby McGee, Help Me Make It Through the Night, For the Good Times and others. And he kind of put me under his wing, and he let me live in his apartment on 17th Avenue. It was then called 17th Avenue South. It's now Music City Row, of course, just a couple doors down from RCA, which I think is just a couple of blocks from your headquarters. And then it was a $50 a month cold water flat. But I lived there for a few years and had a great time. Bus tables at Belmont, tended bar at the Exit Inn. And anyway, I thought I was going to be a songwriter at the time. Fortunately for me, I exercised some wisdom at a juncture not there long after, where I realized that on the track that I was on, I was going to end up as the second act at the Nashville Holiday Inn when I was 50 years old, and decided I should go to Plan B, which I did. And I got into journalism and covered politics. And then I got into politics. I started doing campaigns, and started in Texas. And I worked for Mark White and Ann Richards, and then eventually for George W. Bush, later John McCain, and many others. And then I got into the television business, and I now have a show, a weekly documentary series that's about politics. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's a weekly documentary series that captures all the craziness that's going on in American politics. Then we started that in the election in 2016, and now 5 years later, it's still going. But again, I'll get back to that in a little bit. But let me talk a little bit about where we started this kind of chapter in American politics and where we are now, and maybe talk a little bit about where we're headed. And you all just cut me off when you want to get to questions, because I'm happy to get to that at any point, and I'm happy to stay as long as you like and answer as many questions as anybody has. So let's talk about the phenomenon of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. I remember
Hello, everybody. We're having a little technical difficulty here, and I'm not going to stand in and be a comedian, but I am going to give you some thoughts on the rest of our time together this week. If you are in and you're joining us today, and you've happened on this special time, just note there is more to come over the next couple of days. You can check our schedule at TennesseeRealtors.org/fall convention. And now we're back with Mark. Here we go.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. I was talking about being at at the first Trump rally in 2015, and people were lined up for blocks in the noonday sun of about 105 degrees. And I said, man, something different's going on here. And sure enough, it was. And it was really something new in American politics that nobody had seen before. And of course, that's why he was so successful. So we had Donald Trump running, as you recall, in a Republican primary that had about 17 or 18 other people, well-known people, people who've been in public office for a long time. And Donald Trump came in as this guy who'd never been in elected politics before, but he had a message, and he had a very clear message, and that was he wanted to make America great again. And that is whether or not you agreed with that message at the time, people understood it. They knew why he was running. And part of that message is about making America great again, is taking America back to another place in time when people, had good paying jobs and quality paychecks and could feel safe in their neighborhoods. And so he's really kind of talking about taking America back to another place in time. And people responded to that message. And it was something that was very different. And part of what was different was his speech, as you may recall, when he came down the Trump Tower, down the stairs there, and went on a stage. And I remember that speech that he gave announcing for president, because it was so completely unlike any presidential announcement that any of us had ever seen before. I'd worked for a number of people who'd run for president. I worked in 5 of them, and when you announce, it's a great opportunity to get your message out about why you're running, and the press gives you kind of a free run. And so you want to work on it really hard. And for example, working with George Bush, we worked on his announcement speech probably for 2 months, practiced it, had 20 or 30 drafts, put it on a teleprompter, rehearsed every word. And then to see Donald Trump come down those stairs and literally just do it spontaneously off the top of his head, no notes, no teleprompter, nothing written down, was phenomenal. And it was so striking because it just had never been done before and was so different to many people. And what was compelling about that speech, and the reason that it worked so well, is that it was so different. People were tired of what they'd seen in American politics. They felt that they'd been lied to by Democrats and Republicans, by people who'd been in political office most of their lives. And the content was kind of secondary. What was important was the way he did it. And he did it by just saying, I am who I am. I don't need notes. I don't need advisors. I feel strongly about America and America being first and putting our values first on not only here, but around the globe. And I'm going to go break some stuff in Washington. I'm going to do it differently. And people really responded to that message. Now, the interesting thing about that message was, here was a guy who'd never run for politics before, running against a woman who had arguably thought about it more than anybody in American politics. She had been Secretary of State. She'd been a United States Senator. She'd been First Lady of the United States. She had run for president before. And what is amazing is that this is a really good example of why in America today, in American politics, and arguably other places, what's important is to understand how to communicate. And so Donald Trump was running against a woman who on paper was arguably the most experienced, most prepared to be president of anybody who's ever run before. And yet she was not a good communicator. She did not have a clear message about why she was running. She did not have a clear rationale for why she was running. She didn't have a clear, compelling message like Make America Great Again. And so she was steeped in policy, smart as can be, but not a clear and compelling message. So Donald Trump defied convention, all the sort of conventional wisdom that we all had, all the experts. And I remember the smartest person in American politics on the Democratic side predicted that Hillary Clinton would win with 100% certainty. The smartest guy on the Republican side, his equivalent, said that Hillary Clinton would win with 95% certainty. So that just showed how completely unconventional Donald Trump's candidacy was. And he was, we know, was elected president of the United States in probably one of the greatest upset in American political history. Maybe we can go back to Dewey, but certainly right in there for number one spot. And then, so we've had an American president, Donald Trump, who has governed completely differently than any American president ever has. And had a pretty good run for 3.5 years, and a very strong economy, pretty good record to run on. A lot of it was unorthodox, not typical Republican orthodoxy, not sort of, the old line ideology of, being concerned about deficits or free trade. In fact, he kind of did just the opposite on trade and just the opposite on deficits, ran up a lot of debt, but did it with a very vibrant economy, did a ton of, work on judges and a lot of other things that the Republican base found really important and compelling to them. And while certainly controversial, had some of the strongest ratings in his own party of any president ever. I mean, he had 95% approval ratings in the Republican Party. The only close number to that was George Bush post 9/11, right after 9/11 happened, and obviously had historic ratings. So Donald Trump was in I won't say the driver's seat going into 2020, but in a good position. I mean, first of all, he's an incumbent president, which is a good place to be. Incumbents are almost always reelected. Only a few examples in recent history where they haven't. And it takes something pretty cataclysmic to happen. And sure enough, something cataclysmic happened. And that was, of course, the COVID health crisis. And certainly nobody could predict that. Although some would argue that they did. It was what we call, an act of God, certainly, that descended upon the president. And so we are in the midst of that. And that has shaken the foundations of this race of our politics. And so let me flash into the 2020 Democratic primary, where you had this guy, Joe Biden, running in a very crowded primary, kind of like the primary was for Republicans in 2016. In other words, a very crowded primary, a ton of very talented people. And you had Joe Biden, who'd run twice before unsuccessfully, was 70 something years old, definitely lost a step, definitely more centrist than the drift of the Democratic Party. And yet he prevailed. And I think the fact that he prevailed says something about our politics and the Democratic Party, just in the sense that I think the Democratic Party, despite sort of countervailing instincts, where the drift of the party is definitely leftward and more progressive, somehow Biden was able to prevail, because I think at the end, the physics of winning won out over the physics of ideology in the Democratic primary. In other words, people just at the end of the day said, he may be old, he may have lost a step, but he's Uncle Joe. People know him, we like him. We know him. He's familiar. He's comfortable. He's kind of like an old shoe. And right now, that's what we need. So the interesting thing about Joe Biden, and by the way, Donald Trump saw that early. He knew that Joe Biden was his greatest threat. And that's why early on he took him on. As we know, he was trying to get opposition research on Joe Biden from wherever he could get it, including Ukraine, because he recognized him to be the threat that he ultimately has come to be. And the irony of the Joe Biden president nomination is that we kind of have a role reversal here. Most presidents, when they run for re-election, have become the incumbent. And by that, I mean they've become the status quo. And usually elections are about change versus the status quo. And when you're the incumbent president, you're the status quo candidate. But in this case, we had a role reversal, because Donald Trump is, as he always has been, the great disruptor, the chaos candidate, which he loves and he owns. He would be the first to say, that's my brand. That's how I've governed, and people like it. A lot of people do anyway. And that's why he would say, I've been successful in a lot of things because I've done it differently. Well, that was fine to be the disruptor, even as an incumbent, where you could say, Joe Biden's been around 47 years, hadn't gotten anything done. Stick with me, because we got a pretty good track record. Enter the COVID virus. This was something, as I mentioned earlier, is totally unpredictable and very difficult for any leader around the globe to deal with, including and especially here in America. And so Donald Trump had this crisis, this pandemic that he had to deal with. And so suddenly being the disruptor and the chaos candidate is not necessarily as attractive for a lot of voters. And suddenly the guy who we know and is safe and is not chaotic, but in fact just the opposite, kind of down to earth and comfortable. He's been there before. He knows the levers of government. He kind of knows all the world players, gets along with people. Suddenly that becomes more attractive. And suddenly the notion, even though he's not technically an incumbent, he's a former vice president. People knows that he's been there. So in a time of crisis, suddenly the notion of a Joe Biden presidency seems more attractive. And so that equation for Donald Trump as being the disruptor versus Joe Biden suddenly shifted. And that's why you can see today that Joe Biden is enjoying a good deal of support, that the handicapping the race right now. He's in a good position to win this election, although never count Donald Trump out. He is the great Houdini of American politics. He's in a tough spot now, having contracted the virus himself. But part of his script right now is to say, listen, I caught it, I beat it, and so can you, if God forbid you should encounter it. But the point is, he's flipping the script to kind of a superhero script, which of course is right in his wheelhouse, to say, yes, we have a pandemic. Nobody could have predicted. I did as good as anybody could do. I defy you to tell me where Joe Biden would have done much differently than what I've done. And by the way, if you want to return to making America great again, if you want to return to a better economy, then vote for Donald Trump. And by the way, when you poll people, even today, after all we've been through, people ask who's better on the economy. They say Donald Trump. Ask if they're better off today than they were 4 years ago. People say, yes, they are. Normally, that would be a formula for reelection. That was Ronald Reagan's famous question: are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? So that's where the election stands today. As I said, it's a very steep hill for the president to climb. He's, for example, just to give you an idea about how big the challenge is, Donald Trump won seniors by 7 points in 2016. He's down 27 now among seniors. So that's the kind of thing, that's the thing he's got to address and deal with in just 3 or 4 short weeks, which is tough. But again, I mean, Donald Trump was counted out by everybody in 2016. So I think people be wise not to count him out in 2020 because, I mean, think about what's happened in just the last week, right? A week in Donald Trump's American politics is amazing. And I know that from doing our show, because every week we start on Monday, think it's going to be one thing, and by Friday it's something completely different. So if you think about what happened just last week in politics, we started off with the tax story on Donald Trump, then a debate, and then Donald Trump got COVID. That was a couple of weeks ago, but that all happened in a week. So just imagine what can happen in 3 weeks between now and Election Day. So that kind of sets the stage for this election. It's dramatic. I'll talk for just a minute about our show, and then happy to open it up to questions. As I said, I worked for a bunch of presidential candidates, including George W. Bush and John McCain. By the way, I wanted to just note that John McCain's mother died today. She was 108. She was born before the Titanic, and obviously more durable. So, having watched those campaigns, I thought it was really interesting, and that a lot of what I saw behind the scenes would be interesting and entertaining for people to see. So I came up with this idea of doing a weekly documentary series about campaigns, starting with the 2016 campaign for president. And it's a weekly series, and we start filming every Monday, and then Sunday night we show what's going to happen. And I thought that obviously 2016 turned out to be a very dramatic campaign. Really exciting, and a lot of drama. I mean, what makes good drama? Interesting characters, conflict, and surprise, and we get that every day with this president. So I thought it was going to be a show for 1 year about the campaign and maybe come back in 2020, but 1 week into the presidency, the people at Showtime said the circus hadn't stopped, keep going. And so we did, and we're now in our 5th season, 80 episodes in. And when we first got the assignment to do the show, I thought there'd be weeks where there wouldn't be enough material to do a half an hour show. And after 80 episodes, that has never happened. Every week is, what are we going to cut? What are we going to cut? So it's been a fascinating time in American politics, very dramatic, highly consequential. People are really paying attention to politics. I've got just for those of you who may not have seen the show, I've got a clip here. And I don't know, John, do you want me to play it on my end, or have you got it on your end?
You go right ahead.
Okay, so this will just give you an idea of kind of the feel for the show here. Let me see if I can get this now. And here we go. Standing by.
Mark McKinley. Usually when you see a documentary, it's been made months, if not years after something happened.
The joint resolution is passed.
Oh, here we go. Senator, you look remarkably like Mark McKinley. Ours is a real-time documentary. We are right in the cockpit as things are happening.
There's been a breakdown in the app. If they can't even run a caucus, how can they run the country?
It's fast. The hounds are barking and furious. We are in uncharted territory.
This is the most consequential election of our lifetime. The virus has changed everything.
We acted quickly. We're doing a great job.
America's bitterly divided. Anything can happen between now and Election Day, and likely will.
This year is going to be as ugly as American politics since before the Civil War.
The race is only going to get louder, nastier, and more divisive in the months ahead. The circles will be on the ground and behind the scenes every step of the way. No studio, no scripts, no bullshit, kicking it hard every day.
That is The Circus, a little dose of it, and it's on every Sunday night. Tune in. So happy to open it up to any and all questions.
Hi, Mark. You do have a couple of questions that I'll share with you. The first one from a member that's watching is, what impact do you see Judge Barrett's presumed confirmation to the Supreme Court having on voters between now and November 3rd?
That's an excellent question. When the vacancy became open, there was a lot of discussion about what that would mean, and initially it seemed to be a really good strategic opportunity for the president, and here's why. Anytime the strategic imperative for the president is to make it about something other than COVID and other than being a referendum on his handling of the COVID crisis. He wants it, in order for him to win, it needs to be a choice between him and Joe Biden and not just a referendum on his handling of the COVID crisis. So anytime the president can talk about something other than the COVID crisis, that is a good day for him. So when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died and the nomination came up, it occurred to me and to others that this was a very good opportunity for the president to change the conversation. And I think that was true. Donald Trump has strong support among evangelicals and the conservative base, a lot because of what he's done with judges. I think he's appointed more than 300 federal judges during his presidency, which I believe is by far a record in anybody's first term. And now he has an opportunity to fill a third Supreme Court vacancy. So when it happened at the time, I believe that it was an opportunity for the president to change that narrative. And then the president got COVID. And so, of course, that shifted the narrative back to the COVID crisis. So I think it is still, ultimately, when you net it out, it is a good thing for the president to have this nomination going on. It gives him an opportunity, now that he is better, to get to shine the spotlight back on the nomination, which started today. I think that while certainly Democrats, we're going to raise all kinds of ideological criticisms and opposition to the nominee, from a sort of strategic point of view, she is like out of central casting. She is incredibly well qualified, has a great story of, she has 7 kids, 2 of them adopted. So to the extent that she can take the spotlight, and certainly will during the next couple of weeks. And I think, by the way, that's part of the reason that Republicans have been so determined to push this nomination through, is because they think she's an exceptional choice and they think that she will get confirmed. Certainly why they maintain the Republican Senate, and obviously that's why they want to try and push it through before the election. So I think on when you net this all out, even though Democrats are crying foul because they're pushing it through, it's a good opportunity for the president. And by the way, Joe Biden has got himself in a box on this question of expanding the court, because what the Democrats are now doing, as many of you know, is sort of in a vengeful reaction to this nomination. They are planning they want to expand the size of the Supreme Court from 9 to 11 or 13 or 15. And that's kind of their way of going back to the Merrick Garland thing that happened under President Obama, but now with this nomination going through. And Joe Biden, when asked his position about whether or not he wants to expand the court, is not saying, in fact, not only not saying, he's saying, I'm not going to tell you till after the election, which is, people are reading through that, of course, and saying, well, he's not saying because he doesn't want to say, because it's not going to be politically popular. And people are right to think that, because that's exactly what's going on, is that Biden knows that that's not going to be a popular thing to talk about before the election. So he's just saying, I'm not going to talk about it, which is an interesting position for anybody running for president to take. Just ask me after the election.
Question. There appeared to be daily polls during the 2016 election, mostly in Clinton's favor. We've seen fewer polls this go round. Do you believe the polling in 2016 helped push more voters to the polls? Well,
there's been a lot of looking in the rearview mirror about the 2016 polls and, the conventional wisdom that those polls were wildly inaccurate. That's not exactly true. I mean, the reality is that people looked too much at the national polls, and the national polls had Hillary Clinton winning by 2 or 3%. And that's actually what she ended up winning by in the popular vote. But of course, this is the United States of America, and you don't win if you win the popular vote. I worked for George W. Bush, I know. You have to win the Electoral College, and that means you have to execute a strategy, which often means ignoring the national polls and going to states where you can rack up 270 electoral votes. And the mistake that the media made, a lot of the media, and obviously the Clinton campaign made, was not looking at the key states, specifically Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, where Donald Trump was able to draw an inside straight and put that coalition together to put him over 270. So there's been sort of a lot of notions about, Trump voters who didn't talk to pollsters or didn't like to say publicly that they were for Trump. I think there's no question that polling is flawed, not only because of, first of all, how many of you have in recent years answered a political poll? I'd say very few of you, right? People just don't want to talk to pollsters anymore. They don't, pollsters have to work really hard to find people to even answer questions. And those that answer the questions, you have to ask, are those like normal voters? So that's why I say, despite the conventional wisdom, once again in 2020, don't sell your house and bet this election, because, strange things happen, and they happen a lot in American politics today. And by the way, my old colleague Karl Rove, who's one of the smartest guys I know in politics, is going to write a column for the Wall Street Journal on Thursday. At least he told me he was. I hope I'm not doing a spoiler alert here, but he's related to me some very interesting and, again, counterintuitive numbers about Republican registration numbers. And what I mean by that is that there have apparently been kind of below the radar, very intensive, pretty successful efforts over the last year among Republicans to register more voters, and that they've done a lot more of that than Democrats had. And so, again, when we do polling, it's always looking in the rearview mirror, looking at models of how many people voted last time. But we don't know how many people are going to vote this time. And if it's true, as Karl is suggesting, that there are a lot more Republican voters, that's not by the poll. So again, that's another equation. That's another just piece of this puzzle that you've got to consider when you think about what the outcome might be.
Thank you. There is a follow-up question to the polling. Because of the 2016 polls, which seems to surprise everyone, do you think the polls really carry much weight as the news outlets like to push?
Yeah. So I think you're right that the news media likes to push it. The news media is I think any objective observer would say that the media is by and large liberal, and that they tend to bias toward whoever the Democratic candidate in that narrative might be. And so they love reporting all these polls. So as I said, I think you can and should take all of it with a grain of salt, because we just don't know what the actual turnout numbers, who's registered. There's a lot of potential for, we got mail-in ballots in states that haven't done this before. So that's a whole nother issue I can talk about a little bit, and maybe will here in a second, which is, what's going to happen on election night, given the fact that so much of this is going to be done by mail. But there are some concerning issues for the president, which I mentioned before, which are, he has apparently dropped a lot among his support among seniors and suburban women. And if that's true, he's got to make up those deficits now. Doesn't mean that he can't. Doesn't mean that he won't. The question is, will he? And but I think some of those numbers we've seen in enough polls that it has to be a issue of concern for the president's reelection campaign. But they know it, and I know that they're addressing it, and they're going to try and find either ways to reestablish that support or find it elsewhere.
Great, thank you. You have a fan, one of our members, who said that she loves the show, and we have been watching since the beginning. What do you think are the biggest battleground states that might flip And do you have any predictions you want to share?
Well, first of all, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Like I said, there's never any lack of material. Every week, it's like, what are we going to cut? What are we going to cut? We could do 3-hour shows every week. The key battleground states are obviously going to be those ones where Donald Trump flipped the deck last time. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those are key. In order for the Democrats to win back the presidency, they have to win back those states that they had traditionally won. And right now, again, we have to question whether the polling is accurate, but Biden's doing pretty well in those states. I mean, he's from Scranton, theoretically, or he would argue that he grew up there or spent a good portion of his youth in Pennsylvania. So that makes him certainly a stronger candidate than Hillary Clinton was for Pennsylvania. There's a couple of, troubling parts of this equation for Republicans and for the president, just because of, largely, some of it's demographic, right? There's just demographic trends that are tough for Republicans. In places like Arizona. Arizona has been reliably Republican for a long time, and could flip this time. That's a state that the Democrats are looking very hard at to flipping into the D column, which could erase a deficit somewhere else. Georgia's another place where there's demographic changes, particularly in Atlanta and the suburbs, that put Atlanta in play. North Carolina is another key state that we'll be watching closely. Let me go to the issue that I mentioned briefly, which is kind of how and when this is going to be decided. There's a chance, and maybe even a strong one, that this election will not be decided election night. Here's why. Largely due to COVID, states are experimenting. Some states are experimenting with, others have done it for a while, like my home state of Colorado, but there's much more mail-in balloting going on this year. I think it's going to go from about 20 or 30 million in 2016 to up to 100 million. Now, a lot of the states that are doing this have not done it before. Colorado's done it for 7 years. They do it very successfully, but they've been doing it for 7 years. Pennsylvania's doing it for the first time, and that's a key swing state. And here's the trouble. Here's the problem. Here's the challenge. In Pennsylvania, and I know there was some lawsuits about this, but the last I saw, if you want to mail in a ballot in Pennsylvania, you can mail in your ballot on election day. That means at the earliest, it's not going to be counted until 2, 3, 4, 5 days after the election, right? So there's a very good chance, even a problem, say that states like Pennsylvania, we will not know the outcome on election night. Now that creates all kinds of, it creates something called the red mirage theory. And what that means is that you could have a situation where it is likely that many more Democrats than Republicans will vote by mail. Many more Republicans than Democrats will vote in person on election day, so that more Republicans vote on election day. So for media outlets reporting election night and only looking at the numbers of people who voted that day and not factoring in the mail-in ballots that have yet to be counted could easily make an early determination that Trump has won the election. But that could be deceiving because of the fact we have so many mail-in ballots that will have yet to be counted. So I think that there's as I said, a highly probable situation where we could not know the outcome of the election until up to a week or more after the election. And that's why media outlets and everybody's going to have to be really careful about how they report on this. Now, the thing that would avoid that, and I'm just telling for you to watch on election night, would be that if Biden it really rolls it up in a substantial way, that will mean that he wins Florida. Now, if it's very hard for Donald Trump to win the presidency, or Republicans, period, to win the presidency without winning Florida. So if you see on election night, and Florida will be reported early, and they don't count mail-in ballots after election night. So if you see Florida come in election night for Joe Biden, that could be an indication that Biden's really running up the score, that we won't have to wait for days on the outcome, and that it would be a clear and decisive victory for Biden.
Okay. You had one come in that is asking, do you think that the potential voter suppression could impact the election?
the short answer is I sure hope not. Voter suppression is something that just the whole notion of it bothers me terribly. I've worked all my life in politics, and I love our American democracy. And I think that we should have, expand opportunities for voters to vote, obviously securely. But I think the real incidence of voter fraud is relatively rare and usually not intentional. It worries me when I see, voter suppression efforts. And I'll just give you one example, which is from my older home state. I spent a lot of time in Texas, and the governor there decided that he would eliminate the ability for voters in Harris County, for example. They had 40 mail-in drop boxes. So you have all these people, and especially older voters who are afraid to vote in person because of COVID, who want to mail in their ballots. And Harris County is bigger than Rhode Island. And so they had 40 drop boxes placed around the county for people to drop in their mailboxes, to drop off their votes. Well, the governor decided, for rationale that I don't understand, or to me is not defensible, to say that, no, you're not going to have 40, you're going to have one, and eliminated all the drop boxes. So there's only one place for residents of Harris County, again, larger than Rhode Island, to vote. So that puts a huge burden on people who are older or have difficult means of getting transportation to vote. So that's the kind of thing that, that clearly would suppress votes in places like Harris County. Fortunately, I'm glad to say that a judge overruled that decision by the governor. At least that's the latest, and that may be appealed in some other court or some jurisdiction. But right now, they've changed that so people can vote. I'm happy to say.
Thank you. Okay, a fun question for you. In light of your work on House of Cards, is there one aspect of the show that you have seen play out in real politics?
Oh, wow. Well, I haven't seen anybody killed yet. Nobody's been pushed in front of a train or a subway. But I have to say that these recent years in politics have been, in many ways, crazier than House of Cards. I mean, I can't think of one, but I can think of 100 ways in which, if I wrote a script that said that, the president of the United States catches a pandemic virus, they would have thrown me out of the room. Said, that's ridiculous. That's too much of a stretch. So let's just say the president gets a COVID pandemic crisis, I mean, think of all the other things that has happened to this president that he has, managed to escape from. Truly, if I had taken the script of the last 4 years of the Trump presidency into Showtime 5 years ago, and instead of pitching The Circus as a documentary show, I pitched this as a fictional show, they would have thrown me out. They would have said, that's the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard. So in this case, we have, fact that is truly stranger than fiction.
That's true. Okay. Do you see any indication of inroads for Trump among minority voters, especially among Hispanic, Latino populations?
The short answer is yes. I really do. And I think a lot of it is merited. And I think Donald Trump gets unfairly sort of treated for good things that he's done for, look at some of the prison reform stuff he's done that particularly affects the African-American community and communities of color. I think, huge props to him. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. But I think that's where the Trump campaign, I talked earlier about making up deficits among, for example, where he may be following up with seniors or suburban women, minority communities where he can make up some of that vote and where they're trying to. And so I think he's got a message and an opportunity to make it Hispanics in Nevada and Florida, which are two really key states. As I said, he's got to win Florida to win, and Hispanics could make the difference there. He's really popular with Cuban Americans, especially in the Miami-Dade area. And so that is a place where he could make up for deficit. And again, in Nevada, and I think that some of what he's done over the last 4 years that directly affect communities of color will, in theory, get him more votes than he got in 2016.
Great. Can you speak to President Trump's personality and how that has affected his popularity with certain groups that he broke away from in 2016? And maybe also speak to the personality of Biden.
Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump is remarkable in the sense that he doesn't shy away from what might be unpopular for any other politician. And again, that's exactly why people like him. He's blunt. He's a blunt force object. He just throws the rules of convention out the window. And it's amusing in some ways because, people, for literally hundreds of years said there's only one way to do this. And it's this way by this book and these rules. And Donald Trump just threw it out the window and said, watch me. And again, I hear it and I see it all the time from supporters who may not agree with him, even on a lot of stuff. They don't like his language. They don't like a lot of things, but they just love the fact that he's disrupting things, that he's doing things differently. And it took somebody like Donald Trump that had the self-confidence to do it. In other words, other politicians are going there and say, oh, I have to please this constituent, I have to please that constituent, I have to please the Republicans in the Senate or the House leader or whatever. And he just said, screw it, I'm doing it my way or the highway. And it has served him well. It elected him president. And so that's why he's reluctant to kind of conform to conventional wisdom, do things differently. And I think this whole COVID thing has been an example of that. I mean, he marches up to the balcony and takes off his mask, and to him, it's all about strength versus weakness. That's he's got to project an image of strength. Biden is, he's a consummate politician. He's kind of just the opposite. I'll just give you one example of this. Joe Biden's from Delaware and been in politics for 47 years, as Donald Trump likes to remind everybody. And he says, I've done more in 47 months than he's done in 47 years. But Joe Biden would ride the Amtrak train to Washington, D.C. And one day I was on that train and I ended up sitting with him. And we're in a kind of a booth on the train where 4 people were seated. And there were a couple of college kids in the booth as well. And I was like, oh my God, it's the vice president. And, I said hello. We'd known each other from earlier intersections over the years. So he was very cordial and, how you been? But I'm thinking, this guy is the vice president of the United States. He's a busy guy, obviously got a lot to do. And probably the last thing he wants to do is, entertain me or these, couple of college kids on a train from Delaware to DC. And so I kind of just back off and I, get on my computer and assume that he's going to take a nap or he's got some work to do. And he never shuts up the whole time. I mean, talking to me, but also as much to the college students. I mean, he's just a political machine. He's got to be on. And it was all about politics and policy. And, it was just sort of stuff that you'd expect from a senator or vice president, but not on a train with a couple of college kids. You'd think he'd want to take a break. So Joe Biden is, he's I guess the thing about him that is both you could argue is a liability and an asset is he's kind of a consummate Paul, right? He's just an old style politician in the way that Donald Trump is not at all. And so they really offer 2 clear, completely different propositions to the American voters. And, in the way that's why it's so contested and it's so heated is it's a very different vision and approach.
Great, thank you. So the next question is about the vice president candidates. Traditionally, the vice president candidates have a lesser impact on voters. Do you see that as a different time this go round?
Great question, and the answer is yes. I think we have 2 candidates who both of whom, when one of them is elected, will be the oldest president ever to hold the office. So people are looking at Donald Trump and Joe Biden with that understanding. They know that these are a couple old cats, right? And Donald Trump is, he doesn't have any obvious health issues other than what he just went through, but seems to be okay. Joe Biden has, I think Donald Trump certainly argues has lost a step, but he's still got some pretty good steps. Yet they're the oldest people to ever hold that office. So I think that people definitely look at Mike Pence and Kamala Harris through a different lens. I think they look at them as very potentially people who would step into the office sometime in the next 4 years. God forbid that something would happen to their bosses. But given their age, given the environment that we're living in with the health crisis going on, it's certainly a possibility. And so I think that enhances, it raises the bar for both Harris and Biden. And that's what I thought about that last debate. I thought that people would be looking at it more carefully because they'd be looking at these people as people who could very easily be president. And I think they're both very talented. I thought they were both in many ways better debaters than their bosses, and did a pretty good job representing their parties.
It's interesting that you brought that debate up. That's your next question. What difference do you think the vice president debate made, and what about the canceled presidential debate next week? Does that place any more importance on the final debate, which will take place October 22nd?
Great questions. I'll start in order. I said, it was featured in our program Sunday night. I said that this debate, it elevated the vice presidential debate in importance just because of some of the things we just talked about. And then it certainly even more so since the president had COVID at the time. On the other hand, I thought that while both Pence and Harris did well, I don't think it changed anything. I mean, at this point in the race, arguably, you want something that's a game changer, and nothing in that debate changed the game. Now, given where the president is, at least by conventional polling standards and research, you think he's in a hole, and he needs to change the game. That's why he wanted Pence to do more in the debate to change the game. Even though Pence arguably did very well, there was nothing that made people say, "Oh, I'm looking at this race in a new way." And there's 25 days left and a lot of ground to make up theoretically, and you've got to use every opportunity. So I think it was a missed opportunity, or is a missed opportunity. It's going to be a missed opportunity that Donald Trump decided that he passed on that second debate opportunity. Now I realize it was his instinct to say, "Oh, this is baloney. It's a virtual thing. Let's do it in person." That's very Trumpian, right? It's like, I want to be on the stage. I want to get in that guy's face. But I think he kind of did it on a technical merit, and I think if he had to do it over, he'd do it over, because he needs every opportunity he can to get in front of as many people as possible to make the case that he'll be a better president than Joe Biden. And he wants to make that direct comparison with Biden on stage or virtually on stage, but both of them, on a screen debating each other in front of, upwards of 50, 75 million people. And he had the opportunity to do that, and he passed on it. So I think that was a missed opportunity. I think if he had to do it over again, and once they thought about it, it's like, let's get a redo on that. Let's go. But it does place now an even greater premium on what I think now will be that very final debate.
Well, Mark, I think that wraps up all the questions that we had in the chat box. Do you have any final words for us?
Well, it's so great to be with you all. I really appreciate you having me. You've got a great organization. I've enjoyed every intersection that I've had with you all, and I love the way you do your business. I love the way you plug in your communities. I love the way you are responsible, civic-minded folks, in addition to all the things you do in your job that you do in your community. So it's an important time to be plugged in. So I appreciate what you do and appreciate you having me. And when you can, tune into the circus Sunday nights at 8 o'clock.
We really appreciate you being here. So thank you for taking the time with us. It has been a pleasure listening to your insights and your past experience. And again, thank you very much for all you do. And we look forward to this election and seeing the outcome. Thank you.
Kick it hard, carry on regardless.
Thank you.
Special thanks to our generous 2020 sponsors. Diamond Level, RealTracs, Tennessee Real Estate Education Foundation. Platinum Level, Memphis Area Association of Realtors. Gold Level, Greater Chattanooga Realtors, Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors. Transaction Desk, Tennessee Housing Development Agency. Silver Level, Greater Nashville Realtors. To learn more, please visit us online at tnrealtors.com/sponsors.
We get it. Your time is valuable. That's why RealTracs works around the clock to ensure that you have uninterrupted access to a sleek and robust MLS system containing the most accurate and up-to-date market data available. We are committed to providing you with the support, training, and tools necessary to make the most of every opportunity. So go ahead, grab a drink, stretch your legs, even take care of a different kind of business. But know that your real estate business is backed by a team of training and support experts who bring the power of reliable real estate directly to you. That's the RealTracs difference. Visit Realtracs.com to learn more. RealTracs. Search, list, buy confidently.
We put real estate's top tech in your hands, giving you and 1.4 million agents in North America a complete set of tools for every aspect of your transactions, so you can spend more time with your clients. Each of these tools works together to form real estate's leading end-to-end transaction solution. The Lone Wolf Agent Cloud.